Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. I'm Moreh Rapha'Yah. In this amazing Shabbat, welcome to all of you. If you haven't subscribed, please do so you can get more notice and more productions that are on their way. We are constantly working with more productions, either say in English or Spanish, but we're constantly are working with so much of the Torah that we need to bring. It's just the only thing that always get on the way. It's pretty much the time, but we're always constantly working with productions and Torah classes, and also as far as all this, also this today we're gonna talk about the Torah portion, the sequence of Torah portion throughout the entire cycle year. So today we are going to study the Torah portion of the Torah Miqetz. Miqetz means in the end or at the ends. So let's start off real quick, and here we pick up what from last week's Joseph's, what he went through the entire ordeal with his brothers, how he wound up in Egypt, and there was a master plan from Yahweh. There's a reason why the Creator made him go through the hurdles and until he wound up as a slave in Egypt. And now we are going to find out what happens to Joseph and how he ascends to the top, but he needed to do all the things before he got there. So let's find out how was it. Parashat Miqetz, we can pretty much see the Pharaoh here by the side of the River Nile. By the way, I've been in River Nile, and it is very beautiful. It is the way you see in pictures. It hasn't changed much. Usually in the River Nile, there is always a stream going. If you notice from north to south, usually it's backwards in the mind of the Egyptian. Usually the north is south and the south is north, because the river streams goes north, or it goes south. It doesn't go up, it goes south. So in other words, it goes north, and that's how they view the northern part of the Egypt, which is the south, and the southern part of the Egypt, which is north. And it's kind of like weird, but that's how it is viewed in the mind of an Egyptian. So here in this parasha, let's jump into it, and it's chapter 41 to 44, 17 of Genesis. Parasha number 10, it says, Miqetz, at the end of 2 years, Pharaoh, he had a dream. He was standing at the side of the river. We already said that it was the River Nile. Now, it is very uncommon to see things like this, except it is a dream. So here we see how he's been having these weird dreams that no one can actually interpret or decipher these dreams except for someone very special. And there is a reason in the book of Yashar, says very clear that Yahweh blocked their view how to decipher their dreams, and they couldn't basically see what these dreams could be, but they had to come up with a weird stories, and that did not make any sense in the eyes of the Pharaoh. That's why he wasn't very happy. That's why we will see what happens to them. And let's jump back in. So this is what he was at by the River Nile, and he said the Torah says that 7 cows came out of the River Nile, and this is what happens, that they start these thin cows start eating the very healthy cows. So, and another was 7 crops were eating the very, very healthy crops. So let's jump into this and let's continue. Let's go into the Aramaic version of Targum. It says, it was at the end of the 2nd year that the remembrance of Joseph came before the word of Yahweh, and Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. Here it says very clear that at the end of 2 years. So next I will show you the chronology of Joseph in Egypt from the moment that he took off from his father's house until the moment that he ascended. How long did it take, and where was he the whole entire time? So, but one thing I do really interesting to me, that the members of Joseph came before the word of Yahweh. Who is the word of Yahweh? That's my question to you. And it's basically the Mashiach. Remember that the Mashiach is the word of Yahweh. He's the Torah, the living Torah. Let's continue. Let's look at the chronology, the timeline of Joseph's. He was 1 year with Potiphar's house. And remember that the wife was basically wanted to sleep with him. But in another time we all go deep into it, how the whole thing unraveled. But to make the long story short, he ends up in that prison, which Potiphar happens to be the general there. So he put him there, and it happens to be also the Pharaoh's prison. It wasn't the regular prison, by just so you know. He was 10 years in prison. Okay, after their ordeal with Potiphar's house, and 2 years later, after revealing the dreams, the complete 13 years, which makes him 30 years old when he ascended to Pharaoh's second in command. Remember, he was 17 years old when he left his father's house. So that sums up to 13 years completely away from his father. Now, chapter 41, verse 12 of Genesis, there was a young man with us, a Hebrew, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams. He interpreted them for us, our dreams. So this is the cupbearer that he's basically telling the Pharaoh that he also had an encounter with someone who was way better than the magicians and the wizards that Egypt offered. So let's continue. 14. But remember me when it goes well with you, and show me kindness, please, and make mention to me to Pharaoh, that he might deliver me from this prison. Now let's pause here for a moment. And there is a way, and there is a reason why I bring this up. Remember that Yahweh put him there. He easily can take him out. There is a reason why he needed to be there, and the reason why is because he needed to grow spiritually. And it's something that he teaches all of us, that we might go through tribulation. That is basically the whole point that I'm trying to bring. If our forefathers went through tribulation, don't you think that we might also go through tribulation, even to prison? Remember what it was, it will be again. That's what the book of Ecclesiastes 1:9 says. Each one of us are not absent from these kind of situations. Even the Mashiach himself said it very clear, that if I suffer and these disciples suffer, you will too. And also, I don't know if you remember, but the scriptures are very clear, crystal clear, when it talks about prophets that went through so much suffering, so much tribulation, to the point where they were slaughtered, they were killed by their own people, by our forefathers, because they didn't like the truth. And today we're living in a modern day where people don't like to be told the truth. They like lies, to be honest with you. They like to be told lies, and it's just the same as what it was before. That hasn't changed much. The only thing that changes basically the format in few things, technology and so forth, but the heart of the man does not change. So far we're still acting the same thing as our forefathers did. Going back to Joseph, he is in prison. Remember, and I do want to mention something that happened before. Remember that he needed to bring a report to his father. The Torah says very clear that he brought a bad report from his brother, which is called lashon hara, which is evil speech. He was actually talking behind, or whispering behind the brother's ears, and this is what he brought to his dad. But if you notice how many years he was in prison, 10 years, 1 year per brother. Now let's go back over here, another additional 2 years. Why? Because instead of and let's go back and let me show you once again, so you don't think I'm making it up or I'm bringing it from my sleep. Okay, he says very clear in red that he may deliver me from this prison. Who? The Pharaoh. The question, how about Yahweh? How about our Creator? Isn't it the one that he's the one who has the power to shut doors or to open? Isn't it him, to Yahweh, that he has the power to give you knowledge or to take knowledge out of you and block and make you dumb? He has the power to do so many things. So why is it that he failed here, Yosef? Let's look into another thing. Book of Yashar 46 verse 9. And the steward to whom Yosef had interpreted his dreams forgot Yosef and did not mention him to the king as he had promised. For this Yahweh to punish Yosef because he had trusted in man. You see this? Instead of putting the trust in Yahweh, he put trust in man. It's very clear that we need to do the same thing. We need to trust Yahweh's deliverance every time we are in trouble. Why? Because he's the only one that has the power to do so. In any case, we need to be in prayer all the time, so that way our emunah, our faithfulness. 46:20, Joseph, he remained after this in the prison of the house for 2 years until he had served 12 years. You see this? So he was completely 12 years. He's supposed to be delivered after 10 years, but instead of waiting for Yahweh's deliverance, he put the trust on man. He was in prison, and yet he was blessed because Yahweh gave him favor in the eyes of men. That means that we need to do the same thing, brothers and sisters. We need to, in the very lowest, on the lowest of our lives, we need to be the light of the world. Just because we are suffering, just because we are going through rough patches, that it does not mean that we need to go and act like the world, start behaving like the world. We don't. We need to continue as a tzaddik, as a righteous man. Why? Because that's how we're going to show whatever we are learning on the Torah, we need to show in action the Torah. It's not just to study, it's not just to listen to this Torah portion and then, that's very nice what he's saying. No, it's not about that, brothers and sisters. It is about learning the Torah and applying it every day in your life, with your brothers, with your sisters, with your mom, with your dad, with your husband, with your wife, with your friend, with your coworker, with your boss, with anybody. You need to apply the Torah in your life, because what's the point of learning Torah if you're never going to apply it? Don't you remember what Shaul or Paul says, that faith or emunah without works is dead? What's the point of learning Torah if you're never going to apply it? It doesn't make any sense. We become liars, in other words, because we're not learning at all. We're just listening, and that's it. That's very good knowledge. That's not knowledge, brothers and sisters. Knowledge is when you become a knowledgeable and a wisdom to apply it. And this is exactly what Yosef is doing in prison. 48 verse 1 of Yashar. In those days, after Yitzhak's death, Yahweh ordered and cause a famine throughout the land. So this is something that you will see it all the time, brothers and sisters, that every time a tzaddik or a righteous dies, a famine or something comes after that. Do you think I'm making it up? I'll give you a few examples. Remember when Methuselah died? Remember what happens after that? And by the way, Methuselah in chapter 5 of Genesis, it means, the meaning of that name means that his death shall bring. That's what it means. His death shall bring the flood. Because it was already prophesied that the day that Methuselah died, the flood will follow. Not only that, let me give you another example. You guys remember Miriam, which happens to be Moses' sister. Remember that she also died. What happens right after that? They thirsted water. There was no water. She brought water because of a righteous person. So you're always going to follow the certain pattern on the Torah, where it's always going to see something happen after somebody's death. In this case, Jesus' death brought a famine. Let's continue. Verse 2, at the time the Pharaoh king of Egypt was sitting on his throne. You see what follows after that? In the land of Egypt, and he was lying on his bed and dreamed, and Pharaoh saw in his dreams that he was standing by the river of Egypt. You see this? This correlates exactly what the Torah is talking about, which is the nightmares that he was having, the Pharaoh, and this happens 2 years right after that Joseph's the complete of the 12 years of Joseph's in prison. Verse 27, 48:27 of Yasher, the king commanded that all the wise men and magicians should go out from before him, and they all went out before the king in shame and dishonor. And the king commanded that a proclamation should be sent throughout the land, all the Egypt, and to kill all the wise men who were in Egypt, and that they should not suffer to remain alive. In other words, don't leave them alive. They need to be killed, slaughtered. So this is something that he knew. They were just making stuff up. They were bringing stories about the dream that did not make any sense in Pharaoh's eyes. No wonder why he was really, really furious about them. And every single one of them says very clear that they were slaughtered. Now, I do want to mention something, brothers and sisters. Yahweh is the king of the world. He's the king of the universes. And I do want to make mention that the book of Yasher says very clear, and also the Torah itself, the scriptures, says that he blocks the wisdom of the wise, of the knowledgeable, of the scholars, of the seminar Bible studies. This is what you've seen in the past. This is what's happening today, nowadays. It exactly what happens. Why? Because Yahweh is not looking for kings or high rank officers. He's looking for the meek. He's looking for someone who's looking for Yahweh with all their heart. And that's what it's all about. You and I, are looking for our Creator. We're looking for the Emet. We're looking for the truth and nothing but the truth. Why? Because we are tired of religion telling us lies. Lies get to a certain point where you just don't want to deal with it. That's why a lot of people don't want to deal with religion anymore. And for us, it's not a religion. It's a way of life. Being a Hebrew, being an Ephraimite of the northern kingdom, means that you have to walk and talk and live as a Hebrew the entire time. From the moment that you start learning Torah until the day that you die, you need to live the Torah. It's a way of life. It's not just 2 hours that you just go sit down in the church okay, or the synagogue, and that's it. You can go home now. No, it's not about that. It's about honoring that date, that date is set apart for Yahweh and nobody else. And that's the problem today. A lot of people don't like to be told the truth, but that is basically the root of the problem. People don't like the truth anymore. They like, especially nowadays, they like to be told lies. But this is not about lying or lies. This is about the truth, and that's what it's all about. So let's continue. And this is what made a path, a way through Joseph, so he can be the only one that can actually deliver to the king. So all these magicians were set for death, were marked for death, and there was no way out. Verse 42 of Yasher, the king was seated in his royal throne. And by the way, this happened when Yahusef was taken and brought from prison right away, because he needed to deliver or to tell the meaning of the dreams. Precisely wrote with a golden background, and in the fine gold was upon it glitter and carbuncle, the ruby, the emerald, together with all the precious stones that were on the king's head. Joseph fascinated, and the throne on which the king sat was covered with gold and silver, with stones of onyx, and it had 70 steps. So there were 70 steps that got to where the king was sitting, and there is a reason why that I want you to see. I want to show you this. There was 70 steps that got all the way to where the king was sitting, and this was something not light, to be taken light. You needed to present yourself before the king. In this case, Joseph was astonished. He couldn't believe he was just about to be right in front of the Pharaoh, in front of the king. Verse 44, and it was their custom throughout the land of Egypt that every man who came to speak to the king, whether he was a prince or no one who was estimable in the king's eyes, should ascend to the king's throne up to the 31st step, and the king will descend to the 36th step, and the king will speak with that person. So this, in other words, they will meet halfway. That's what basically is talking about. And you can pretty much see in this graphic, just an example for you to see how the Pharaoh will meet them halfway of the 70 steps. Verse 45, and he was one of the most common. He ascended to the 3rd step. Who is he talking about? Joseph. And the king will descend to the 4th to speak with them. And his custom was, moreover, that any man who understood and speak all the languages ascended to the 70th steps, and climbed and spoke until he reached the king. So, by the way, no one could speak the 70 except for the king, Pharaoh. So in this case, any man who was in the lowest on the class, society class, he will get to the 3rd step, 48, 46 of Yasher. And any man who couldn't complete the 70th, climb as many steps as the language he could speak. And it was customary on those days that in Egypt for no one to reign over them, but to speak in all the 70 languages, by the way. In other words, here we can see a perfect example, that verse 48. This is the Joseph's turn. And when Joseph approached the king, he bowed down to the ground before the king and ascended to the 3rd step. And the king sat on the 4th, or he sat, or he stood on the 4th step, and spoke to Joseph. This is the turn of Joseph. This is the turn where he will deliver the news, or the bad news or the good news, to the king, and tell him the meaning, the true meaning behind it. And this is just Just an example for you to see how he stood before the Pharaoh, how he delivered the bad news and the good news. And of course, the Pharaoh was impressed. He wasn't impressed with the magicians and wizards, but he was really impressed with the wisdom that Yahweh has given Joseph. And the way he carried himself, by the way, it wasn't just like any man. He had favor in the eyes of man. He was a calm man. He was a very secure man. He was someone who you could fall in love with that person without even knowing that person. That's how, kind that person was. Verse 8, 48:8. And the king said to all the officers, I have thought that since a year the Almighty has made known to the Hebrew men all that he has said, there is no one on the earth so discreet and wise as he. And if it seems good in your eyes, I will put it on the earth, for he will save the earth for his wisdom. He already knew that this was the man that needed to make this happen, to deliver, to save the earth from this famine. This famine was going to be something that they never experienced before. And this is something that Yahweh was allowing this to happen so Joseph could climb and ascend to the second of the king. Now this is what happens next. Verse 9, and all the officers answered to the king and said, but it is written in the laws of Egypt that it must not be violated, that no man shall reign over Egypt, nor shall be the second of the king, but he who shall reign over Egypt have knowledge of all the languages of the sons of men. In the case of Joseph was the opposite. Verse 10, now therefore our master and king, behold, this Hebrew man can only speak the Hebrew language. And then how can the second under the government be upon us, and a man who does not even know our language? This is what they pause, and they place in the eyes of Pharaoh. How could this man, lead us? He can even speak the 70 languages. And something happened on that night. Look at what he said. Look at what Pharaoh says. Now we pray thee that we'll send from him, that he might come before thee and test him in all things, and he do what is good for thee. And king said, tomorrow it shall be done. It shall that has spoken is good. So in other words, something was going to happen that particular night. Verse 13. And that night Yahweh sent one of his ministers, malachim or angels, and he came to the land of Egypt to Joseph, and the malach or angel of Yahweh stood over Joseph, and behold, Joseph was lying in the bed at night with his master's house in the dungeon. Remember, he wasn't in the house of Potiphar. He was in prison. He was in a dungeon. The malach, the angel, came and ministered him. He came and helped him out. And guess what happens? 14. And the malach angel raised him up from his sleep. And Joseph arose. And behold, the malach messenger of Yahweh was standing before him. And the malach messenger of Yahweh spoke to Joseph and taught him all the languages of men that night. And not only that, he also changed his name from Joseph to Joseph. You see that? In other words, look, there's more evidence of what I'm bringing to you, because the book of Psalms, look at what it says, chapter 81, verse 5. In the testimony, Joseph, in the testimony when he came out of the land of the Mizraim, a language I didn't know, I kept hearing. Will you notice there's something very important? Even David speaks about this. He's making a testimony. He's bearing testimony about Joseph, not only to know other, speak other languages, the 70 languages, by the way, but also his name also is changed. So if you notice the letter He is the inspiration of Yahweh to this man. In this moment, Yosef's Yosef's state of mind changed completely. Yahweh make him more wise than what he was before. And this is something that you and I always are asking the Creator to give us. They're always asking every time you study the Torah to ask for the Creator to give us knowledge, wisdom, to make the right judgments in everyday life. Whether it's in our jobs, with our friends, with our family, in any kind of business, we need to always ask the Creator to give us knowledge so that way we know what to do next. And that's what the letter He in Yosef's name was changed. That's why I always tell you guys that it's super, super important to change your name to a Hebrew name, because you retain something encoded not only in your name but also in your DNA. You think I'm crazy, right? You always gonna. In another occasion, I will bring you another study about the names and what possesses and how it transforms your life for better, not for worse. Okay, because there's something in the Hebrew that is encoded from the moment that he start calling you that specific Hebrew name. In the Joseph's situation, you can pretty much see that his life was changed for that moment. And I want you to see next. Verse 17. And the king went out and climbed the steps to the throne. And Joseph spoke to the king in all tongues. And Joseph came to him and spoke to the king until he came before the king on the 70th steps and stood before the king. That means, brothers and sisters, and let me just pause, just give me a few seconds. He was speaking every single language of the entire world, the 70 nations. He was speaking one after another one. And I want you to see this next. Remember that the king was sitting on his throne. And what was that Joseph was doing? He was speaking the first language and the second language and the third, and continually speaking one after another one. And I'm sure the people were around, were impressed and astonished at what they were witnessing, and I'm sure including the wives, Pharaoh's wives, including himself, until he reached the 70 steps. This is just unbearable to think about how the person overnight could learn that. Joseph did. He stood right in front of Joseph, and this is what the king did. He gave him the ring of the second command. Yahweh wants the same thing for us, brothers and sisters. He wants for us to be the head, not the tail. In any level of your life, He wants us to be the leaders, not the second to follow. He wants to be the head and not the tail. And this is just a great example for us to learn. Let's continue. Genesis 42:23. Now let's change gear real quick and let's fast forward a little bit, because like I said, this is a Torah portion that will literally, it's so immense, so detailed in many things, but I'm just bringing the most important things. But there are more, to be honest with you. He had no idea that Joseph understood them. This is talking about Joseph and his brothers when they are in front of him, since an interpreter was translating for them. So there was a certain interpreter that was in Joseph's side. Who was the person? Let's find out. So look at what the book of and the version of the scriptures, Targum Yonatan. But they did not know that Joseph understood and heard the Kadosh language, the set-apart language, which is the Hebrew. For Manasseh was an interpreter among them. Who was Manasseh, brothers and sisters? Was Joseph's son. He happens to be about 10 years old, by the way. 10 years old, he was already knowledgeable. Wow, this is just unbelievable. 42:24 of Genesis, Joseph turned away from them and wept, and he returned and spoke to them, and he took Shimon from among them and put him in prison before their eyes. What are we looking up here, brothers and sisters? The question is, the million-dollar question is, why did he took out of the 10 brothers, why did he took Shimon? And there's a reason why. Look at the Targum Yonatan of the same verse. From then he took Shimon, who had counseled them to kill who? Joseph, and to bound them before them. He was the one. Remember, and I do want to make a side note for all of you, if you want to take notes. In Shechem, remember that city, and the son Shechem and Hamor was the king. Remember that Shechem raped Dinah, right? So remember what they did. They all said, "You need, okay, we're gonna let you off hook on this." Not really, but they said that they need to circumcise. And guess who went and killed all the men? It was Lewi and Shimeon. They were warriors. They were strong. All 12 were strong, but they were really warriors. And another time we'll talk about those tales about them. But coming back here, he was the one who counseled them to kill Joseph. And that's one of the reasons why Joseph is teaching him a lesson. Let's fast forward right away. And Pharaoh Djoser, he happens to be Joseph, by the way. Remember this, that in history, let me just here, just for a few seconds. In history, especially Egypt's history, they literally wanted to erase any kind of Hebrew event. We know about Moses, but we know that he was the one deliverer from our forefathers from slavery. But tracing back a little bit more, Joseph as well. They only changed his name. He happens to be Pharaoh Djoser, but he has another name, okay, because he matches exactly what this king was. Imhotep. Imhotep means the first after the king. And who was the first after the king? He happens to be Joseph. He had many names, by the way, Joseph, but Imhotep, remember that also the Pharaoh named him Safana Paneach, okay? In other words, he was another name from him, Imhotep. So these are the whales where they save the silos, where they save the grain. And they were not very small, they were huge. For 7 years, they accumulated all the grain, okay, as much as they could, because another 7 years of famine was coming. And this is where all the people enter, by the way, how they enter inside to be registered. And remember, they kept everything, just like today, especially here in the States. There's always a paper trail for everything, especially in computers. Back in then, there were scribes. They were writing everything down. They were writing the name of the person, where they're coming from, how much money they were paying, and blah, blah, blah. So this is a person, an Egyptian, sitting or standing where the supposed person was taking notes in all what was coming as far as the income and all the money. Okay? And this is just the hieroglyphics, how the workers work around the silos to accumulate the grain. Okay? Imhotep also means the voice of M. By the way, there's no M in Egypt, by the way. And how there's no history of M. Okay? So basically what we're looking at here is basically Joseph. And this is another path to get to where they need to pay for. Let's go back here. Targum Yonatan 46:20 of Genesis. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons in the land of Mizraim, or Egypt, to whom Ashnet, the daughter of Dinah, was brought up in the house of Potiphar, prince of Tanis, Manasseh, and Ephraim. Remember that Dinah was the one who was raped. And the story goes very well, and the Targum says very clear that she was raped, okay? And Jacob, the father, Jacob, wanted not to disgrace her, especially the kid that she was having. And it happens to be a daughter, okay, which is Ashnet, and they did not took that kid. They actually, Jacob took that kid, that baby, and hid it among the thorns. Ashnet means thorns, okay? And Angel Gabriel took that baby and brought it to Egypt, where Potiphar was. And Potiphar and the wife took this woman, Dinah, okay, to be as their daughter, but it wasn't a blood daughter. No wonder the lineage continued. No wonder why the Mashiach came from that lineage. Once again, we always need to understand the reason why all this happened. 43:34 Genesis. Let's go back a little bit more, or jump a little bit more. What happens here with Benjamin when he was with the Josephs, in front of Joseph's for the first time. Each one of them gave him his portion there in front of him, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times greater than any of them, so they drank and enjoyed themselves with him. Now here we see something very, very intriguing. First of all, we see that Benjamin got 5 times greater. The rest didn't. The question is, what was it, and who was it? Let's go and find out the details on the book of Yashar 53 verse 14. And Benjamin went up before Joseph and sat in the throne, and the men saw the deeds of Joseph and were amazed at them. And the men ate and drank at the time with Joseph, and he gave them gifts. Joseph gave a gift to Benjamin, Manasseh, and Ephraim, so the deeds of his father, and they also gave him gifts. Ashnet gave him a gift, and there were 5 gifts in Benjamin's hands. You see that? It wasn't just Joseph, it was also his family as well. It is something intriguing that we see details here. And also, I do want to mention something before I forget. Joseph's, he sought every single brother according to the birthright. You know, the birth, they were their birth line, right? He sought them accordingly, okay? And he asked Benjamin, because he was still standing, he said, and asked him, how come you don't sit down? I said, because I don't have a brother. I said, don't worry about it. Joseph said, I don't have a brother either. You come and sit by my side. And that's one of the reasons he brought him next to him. But something happens here. Something happened that I want you to see, and I want you to see, because he was his beloved brother, he was going to reveal something to him next. He was sitting next to him, and I'm sure the rest of the brothers wonder, why is he sitting by next to Joseph's, the second of the king. He was right next to it, and once again, something was going to happen. 53:18 of Yashar, he commanded them to bring before him their map of the stars, so that Joseph knew all the times. And Joseph said to Benjamin, I have heard that Hebrews know all wisdom. Do you know anything about this? And of course he knew that all the wisdom about the stars, or the Shemaim, were about the constellations and so forth. And this is why one thing I always stress to all of you guys, that we supposed to know the timing. We're supposed to know the stars. We're supposed to know the constellations and the years and the year cycle. In other words, the Torah calendar, the Hebrew calendar, in other words. And that's one of the reasons why our Jewish brothers fail. Why? Because it is given to us, the northern kingdom, to know this knowledge. Okay, we need to restore the truth, the emet, and this is how we do it. And this is what happens to Joseph. He asked him something that he already knew. Let's continue. Verse 19, Benjamin said, your servant also knows all the wisdom that my father taught me. Who taught Benjamin? Who taught Joseph? Of course, it was Jacob's. And Joseph said to Benjamin, look now on this instrument. What instrument was? And understand where your brother Joseph is in Egypt, to whom you told went to Egypt. Now, I do want to stress out something very important. First of all, my question to all of you and is this: did the brothers knew that Joseph was sold or taken to Egypt? Yes or no? And the answer is yes. They knew that. I mean, they made this stuff up that, or they make his father assume that he was killed by a wolf. Book of Yasher says, but it wasn't. Okay, it wasn't. And what happens, brothers and sisters? They knew that Joseph was in Egypt. They just didn't know if he was dead or alive, or maybe as a prisoner or as a slave or whatever. But they went. One of the reasons why they went up to Egypt is to also to look for his brother. Okay, but once again, Benjamin, Joseph is telling him, can you look into this and find out where your brother is? This is what happens next. And what instrument was it, brothers and sisters? This is the instrument. If you didn't know about this instrument, you might want to look it up. This is called the Jacob's instrument, or the Jacob's staff. And I do want to make a side note once again. Sorry, I'm pausing back and forth, but those informations that I'm giving to you right now, those are vital information that some other time we will talk about that. The Jacob's staff is basically the staff that Jacob utilized, or the sticks that Jacob utilized when he was making or mating the goats. Remember that he was making a bet with his uncle Laban, and he said, well, the two color black and white goats are gonna be mine, so I'm gonna, as much as I can, they will be mine. The white ones are yours. So he made something in a certain time, and this happens to be Abib 1, the first of the year, where he actually places sticks right in by the river, and he had to make right there the goats. And now, if you notice, once again, I want you to see this. This is something that you can pretty much Google it and find out. This is called the Jacob's staff. Everybody knows this, okay? It's called the Jacob's staff. And they utilize this to see the constellations, to see the not only that, brothers and sisters, but to see the sun and alignment. And this is what he gave to Benjamin. 53:20 of Yasher. And Benjamin saw the instrument with this map of the stars in heaven, and he was a wise and looked into it and know where his brother was. Benjamin divided all the lands of Egypt into 4 divisions, and found that the one who was sat on the throne before him was his brother Joseph. And Benjamin wondered a lot. And when Joseph saw that his brother Benjamin was so astonished, he said to Benjamin, what do you see, and why you are amazed? He knew, of course, and this is what he was looking at. He was looking at something about the map of the stars, okay? And based upon the instrument that he had at hand, he divided the land of Egypt, and he assumed that his brother was right next to him. Verse 21, and Benjamin said to Joseph, by this I can see that Joseph, my brother, sits here with me on the throne. And Joseph said to him, I am, Ani Joseph, I am Joseph, your brother. Do not reveal this to your brothers. Behold, I will send thee with them, and when they depart, and I will command them to return to the city, to return you to the city, and I will take thee away from them. This was to test their integrity for his brother Benjamin. This was to test them again, which was going to be the final test. Something, brothers and sisters, is that we see that he revealed to his beloved brother Benjamin who he was, but to the rest he didn't. Let's continue. Here, brothers and sisters, we come to an end, and once again, this is a summarized version of the Torah portion, and believe me, we so much detail on this Torah version that I literally summarized it for 3 hours. Supposed to be, if I were to give it, it would be around 4 hours, but I summarized it for 3, to be honest with you. But we'll stop here. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Shabbat Shalom, and continue the good fight, learning Torah, doing tzedakah, righteousness, and so that we can become just like our Mashiach. Okay? Shabbat Shalom. I'm Moreh, Rapha'Yah. We'll see you next time.